Do you feel like you're barely keeping your head above water? That no matter how hard you try, meaningful progress remains out of reach? Heather gets that. She battled an eating disorder for years before seeking help. Now in recovery, Heather is here to tell you that positive change is possible even when it doesn't feel that way. Join her as she shares openly about her struggles and small triumphs. Fair warning though, Heather doesn't hold back. Her candid story may trigger some. But for those wanting honesty, hope, and healing, this is 1% Better with Heather. The information and stories shared on 1% Better are based on host Heather's personal experiences with eating disorders and mental health challenges. Heather is not a licensed doctor, therapist, dietitian, or other health professional. Her advice and opinions should not be taken as professional medical advice. Please consult your physician or a qualified health provider regarding any medical or health-related issues. 1% Better also contains descriptions of eating disorders that may be triggering for some listeners. Discretion is advised.
Hey there, my little gaffers, and welcome to 1% Better with Heather. I have a very special guest today, Dr. Maidenberg. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no, pleasure's all mine. So let's just jump right into it, and I'll get you to introduce yourself.
Yeah. So my name is Michelle Maidenberg. A couple things about me is I have a private practice in Harrison, New York. I also have a nonprofit, which is called Through My Eyes, and it offers free clinically guided videotaping for chronically medically ill individuals who want to leave a video legacy for their children and loved ones. I teach at NYU. I teach a class on mindfulness, and then I have two books. One is called, which is this one, it's called Free Your Child from Overeating, 53 Mind-Body Strategies for Lifelong Health. And then my new one, is called Ace Your Life. That's it. Ace Your Life, Unleash Your Best Self and Live the Life You Want. And it's out in, soft cover, but it's coming out on audiobook in May, which I'm really, really excited about. Yeah. And then I'm also a Psychology Today blogger. And then I also have a YouTube channel where I publish weekly guided meditations every Thursday morning at 11. Yeah.
You have a full plate, my friend.
I do. I have a very full plate.
So I've checked out your YouTubes and your breathing.
Okay.
So here at the 1% Better podcast, we're all about mental health and how to get better mental health. So let's get into that part of it. So for someone who is very high stressed, I come from eating disorder background. I have bulimia and anorexia and all that lovely jazz with PTSD, depression, you name it, I got it. I'm a big ball of fun. So for someone like me, how do we start? Because when we have all that, you live in fight or flight all the time. Yeah. Cortisol levels are through the roof. And it's very uncomfortable, I can only speak for me, to lower that, because that's been my normal my whole life. So if I'm Zen, I think the world is ending. How do we push through that?
Well, I think that's a good point, because you mentioned like your cortisol levels and you brought in a lot of physiology. And I think it's so important for people to know about that, because most people, they're just like, I'm stressed, or I'm anxious, but they don't realize that it affects our mind and body, on multiple levels and layers. And we have to, in order to de-stress or kind of reground ourselves, we have to actually take care of all of those components, or else it's not going to adequately do the job, right? So when you're talking about fight or flight, you're talking about a state, right? If you're used to being in fight or flight, think about it. Your body's constricted. You're literally like this, right? You're like probably in a fetal position. Again, your posture gets affected by that. You may have a physiological response like a rapid heartbeat. You may have headaches, whatever's going on for you, and then emotionally, you may be getting frustrated with yourself and feeling guilt, regret, frustration, anger at yourself why you're feeling this way to begin with, because you should be able to handle the stress, let's say, or you're working on this and why is it still bothering you, right? There's all these self-deprecating thoughts and feelings that come up based on our thoughts and feelings. And we loop, and we loop, and we loop, and then we end up getting thoughts about the thoughts, feelings about the feelings, thoughts about the feelings, and feelings about the thoughts. It's like a big sandwich. Yeah.
It's exhausting.
It's exhausting. Yes. And you know what? That's what people say. That's what people always say. They're like, I am exhausted for good reason. And guess what? We have a lot of reasons to be exhausted, because think about all the uncertainty in our life. Think about all the adversity in our life. Think about what's going on in the world. Like, we don't even have to go far. We could just like turn on, right, and listen to the news, for example, or whatever the case is, the way we're socialized, our narratives about ourselves. Again, I could go on and on and on and on. There's so many components about why we react and have the impact that we do to our bodies and minds. And we do have to pay attention to it, notice it, take care of it. So you were asking a little bit about where do we start? Because that's a really good question, because it could seem so overwhelming. I mean, think about just what we mentioned so far. People could be like, that's just too much. I can't, and you start getting into a helpless, hopeless state because it feels like too much, right? The physiological responses, right? The emotional responses, like people don't know what to do with all that. It's very destabilizing. So the first piece of it literally is to notice. I mean, it's as simple as that. When I talk about the acceptance part of my book, I'm talking about not acceptance where we're relenting or we're accepting mediocrity or however you want to put it. We're noticing it. We're just noticing it. We're curious. We're experimenting. We're open. We're flexible. We're expansive. And that's not easy for most people because they try to avoid and deny, right? And repress and avoid and avoid and avoid. Yeah. So we get into these mind games, which are actually very counterproductive. So that would be the first step, if I had to say what the first step would be.
So I always say sitting in the shit and feeling the feelings.
Yeah.
Sucks. Feelings have never killed anybody. Someone said that to me once. Addiction has, eating disorders have, a lot of other drugs have, everything else has killed somebody. Feeling feelings never has.
Yeah.
So how do we, which is very uncomfortable, and like you said, you avoid, deflect. That's my middle name, deflect, avoid. And not at all flexible. No, I'm stone. How do we get to that point? Because sometimes it feels like we're sitting in quicksand and those feelings now are not helping. Like it's like a wave and you're sinking and it seems like it gets worse before it gets better.
So it's so interesting that you bring up quicksand, because I use that as a metaphor very often. Yeah. And I'll tell you how I use it, because it's pretty ironic that you mentioned quicksand. So when you're in quicksand, do you know the way you get out of quicksand? How do you get out of quicksand?
I have no idea.
Yeah. Okay. So this is really interesting. So the way to get out of quicksand is to just relax, to remain dormant. Okay. Then you float. If you struggle and you try to get out of quicksand, you're going to sink to the bottom and you're going to die. Yeah. Okay. A lot of people don't know that. Now, why is that a good metaphor? Because when we're trying to get out of a situation, our inclination is to make our way out of it. Now, we're also taught to do that because of how we're socialized, right? Like, if I don't like the paint on the wall, change the paint. If I don't like the shoes I'm wearing, change the shoes. Like, that's the way we're taught. That's how we're socialized. Most of the things that we're talking about is not to get out of, but just to be with, right? So if you just remain, like I said, relaxed and dormant in the quicksand, you'll float and you could actually get out. Okay. So sometimes, even though our inclination is to struggle our way out of it, it's actually counterproductive. So that is what we do with our uncomfortable thoughts and feelings. We struggle our way out of it. And when we struggle our way out of it, it intensifies, it exacerbates, etc. And it is actually detrimental. So part of it is to first acclimate your mind and body to the discomfort, and to study it is to actually study it. What does this feel like? And I'll tell people, like, when you're kind of experiencing the discomfort, take a moment, even take a piece of paper, take your phone, think about, what does this feel like? What is my experience right now? Right? What does it feel like in my body? What thoughts are coming up? What feelings are getting presented? What am I compelling? What's my behavior? What is compelling my behavior? When we slow down, because we're slowing ourselves down in the process, and we're not using our amygdala to make decisions, we're using our prefrontal cortex, which is our processing mind, because our amygdala operationally functions based on our thoughts and feelings, which is by our flight and fight and our nervous system. And that doesn't serve us well, typically. That is what creates our impulsivity, not our rational, wise mind thinking. And we need, in those moments, to actually, because then our amygdala will be actually in the background. And we need to make a shift in those moments. We need to function through really putting our prefrontal cortex more formatively. So it's a process, and our minds are so used to, because of our neural networks, it gets embedded and integrated, where we actually have to change that. We actually have to recalibrate our brain.
And that's not easy to do, because
No.
I'm not a doctor, clearly, but I feel a lot of this is genetic. Like, I come from a long line of high-strung people. My people fled, and hard times, and, immigrant family, like all that, work hard, don't complain. And when we're not taught as children to have a healthy way of coping with things, right? I grew up very heavy. I talk about it. I had, like, I don't know, like an eating disorder probably since I was born. Like, I was very overweight. I've been a size 22. I've been a negative 22. And you go from one, I guess it would be an addiction, right? Food, soothing, which a lot of people do, which I, again, think is another genetic component. And when you're surrounded...
It's also what's modeled to you, because it's what you're observing, right? Because if you come from a long line of genetics, it's what you're observing also.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So my mom, my parents weren't drinkers, but my mom self-soothed with food, right?
Yeah.
And so did, like, I think everyone in our family. It also is not helpful when you're Ukrainian and Polish and everything's around food, right? So trying to get those healthy coping mechanisms young. And is that what you teach in your book? Help to not have younger kids overeat?
Yeah. So, well, with the first book, it's really about the psychological barriers, because we do know how to maintain health. If you go on the internet, there's millions of resources, right? We know what we need to do. The problem becomes, how do we sustain that behavior over time? And that is where the magic is. When I do workshops, sometimes I'll ask people, how many of you have lost weight? And, like, all the hands go up. And then I'll say, how many of you have maintained it over time? Hands go down. With any kind of challenge, right? Whether it's an eating disorder, whether it's procrastination, I mean, it could be anything, literally, from A to Z. It's all about, right, learning about ourselves and learning how to sustain behavior, because it becomes habitual. It becomes habituated in our brains, literally, where our brain functioning is created that way, and our bodies, and how we're socialized, and how, again, the narrative we tell ourselves, the way we work in our interpersonal relationships, it goes on and on. It becomes our identity. It becomes the way we see ourselves. It becomes the way we interact with other people. It's all consuming. So it's really unraveling that. So, with kids particularly, and again, the book applies, I use it with adults too, not just with kids, because the skills are universal. It's really more about the psychological. How do we get in our own way? With the second book, it's really precepts, it's predicated under acceptance, compassion, and empowerment. And I see it as a methodology and a way in which we live our lives, right? It's the way in which we move into our lives. It's the way in which we function. And if you do know the skills, right, you will make better decisions. You will have increased confidence. You will, and I could go on and on. That's the whole point of the book. It's not just do this and this will happen. No, it's the way I live. When I make decisions and I feel myself struggling, which happens often, I realize that I'm having a value conflict. And then I could frame it that way, and then I could make a more mindful decision. But if I don't have that frame of reference, I'll just say, oh my goodness, I don't know what to do. And I'll feel guilt and shame and remorse and on and on. Yeah. And I'll be stuck. I'll just be stuck.
Yeah. All the 7 horsemen come in. There are frequent flyers around my house.
Yeah.
And, but how do we, I guess this is like a 2-part question.
Uh-huh.
When you're with, let's say, adolescents,
Uh-huh.
and you're talking about with therapy,
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big proponent of I love therapy.
Yes, it works.
Does everyone come? Mom, dad, kids?
It depends. It depends. So I do see, adolescents in my practice. I see teenagers, young adults, adults. It depends. I have some teens that I work with that I only work with them. I do have some interactions with parents just because you need to. There are times that it's critical for parents to be there because there's a lot of relationship types of challenges that come up. There's times that a child is struggling and they need the support of their parents, right? But I always make sure that I'm empowering the child or adolescent or teen so that they feel agency over their treatment. Because the worst thing you could do is if they feel like in any way you're compromising their confidentiality or you're not really giving them independence and agency in their treatment, they're out of there. Like they're just not going to be connected. Yeah, it's an issue. It's an issue. And sometimes it's challenging, right? Because parents sometimes will call me and they'll be like, I want to talk to you because I'm really worried about my kid and, et cetera. I'll always, and it actually just happened today. I had, it's a young adult that I'm working with, and the mom called and said, I just want to give you a little bit of feedback and whatever. And I could have easily said, sure, like, let's go, hop on the phone. But I said, have you told your daughter that you're contacting me, that you're reaching out to me and that you want to speak to me? That's number one. And then I say, I'm just letting you know, I'm going to reach out to your daughter to let her know or to ask her if it's okay that I speak to you. And also the barometers around speaking to you, right? And typically I'll recommend to the daughter, like, oh, maybe it would be a good idea for all of us to speak together. Sometimes kids are like, absolutely not. I don't want my parents. It's okay for you to speak to them, but I don't want to be there. I hear that quite often. So with this particular young adult, she said, yes, it's okay for you to speak to my mom, but I would prefer you just listening to her rather than, offering any kind of feedback on anything I've said. And I said, sure, that's fine. Right. Because I want to hold what she tells me in confidence. Now, let's say there's something urgent or, it depends, like things come up, but I do want to listen to parents because I want them to feel, again, that I want them to be empowered as well. And when push comes to shove, they're spending a lot more time with their kid than I am. So forging that relationship between parent and children is so critical. And I always try my best to facilitate that. Yeah. At any cost. Yeah. As much as I can.
So with your book, Ace Your Life, and we were talking about the 7 horsemen.
Yes.
How do we learn self-confidence? Because I can only speak for me. I know how I got here, right? So how, like it's, when you grow up in a family where like you're not allowed to be prideful and you're not allowed to be like better than anybody, that like, I don't know, right? It's my life, right? Yeah. I'm not saying I had a crap life. I'm just saying that this is like, you're not better than anybody.
Or everybody has to be better than the other one.
Or too. Yeah, see, I didn't grow up in that one. How do we start new neural pathways, and how, and I guess this is a two-part question, boundaries with the people who like to, as I word, program you, because it's very easy to go back there when you're sitting like,
Yeah.
misery loves company. Let's just be honest, right? No one wants to be happy for anybody. I don't know what's wrong with people. And how do we do that? Because a lot of the times it's the parents.
It is, but as we get older and as we're adults, right, we make our own decisions, and we can't be blaming our parents forever, because that's not going to help us make just better decisions as adults. But it is important to have self-compassion in terms of, because you asked about confidence. It's so interesting that you're, again, very ironic again, that you're asking about confidence, because it just so happens this week I published a blog for Psychology Today on confidence. And it was 10 assumptions that we make that inhibit our confidence. That was the name of the article, if anybody wants to read it. But and it got a good showing. But that is what my whole book is about. Because if you constantly are building on your confidence, you're going to live your best life and live the life you want. I mean, that's just the way it is. People have this idea that if you shame them, and right, this was kind of a little bit of antiquated thinking, that they're going to then perform. It's the opposite. When people feel positive confidence, when they feel a sense of agency, when they feel efficacy, that is when they perform. For example, a child, right? If they're tantruming, you're not going to go over to them and yell at them for tantruming, because then they're going to tantrum more. You're going to be nurturing and loving and caring, right? And that's what the child wants. That's what we want too. When we feel positive ourselves and we believe that the effort we put into something is going to reap rewards, that's when we're going to do something, and that's when we're going to perform, and that's when we're going to have our motivation to perform. So we can't just will our way into believing that we're terrific and intelligent and lovely and whatever. We have to prove that to ourselves. I can't say that enough. It's all in the doing. It's all in the behavior. So it's about what gets in our way of behaving in a way that we're leaning into our confidence. And I always say to ask this question: is this going to help me to lean into my confidence, or is it going to help me to lean outside of my confidence? When you're making a decision, it's a really good question to ask yourself.
So what would, okay, I'm trying to think, what would not lean into your confidence?
Not acting from your values. Anything that leads like not acting from your values, right? Or most of the decisions that we have to make that are challenging decisions, there's a value conflict. In other words, we have two values that are formative and important to us, and we have to make one decision based on two very, very important values. But if we don't think about it in that framework, we may make a decision that's riddled with guilt and shame and regret. So again, you're probably like, what is she talking about? Part of it is reading my book, unfortunately, or fortunately, because there's a whole chapter on value and decision making. Yeah, there's a whole chapter on that. Making positive decisions. If you said to me, Michelle, do you feel confident in your decision making, and do you have many regrets? I could actually tell you that I don't. I really don't, because I really use this methodology when I make decisions, and I'm very cognitive about it. Like it's a very cognitive process by which I go through. I've trained my brain to go through this process. It doesn't mean I don't have feelings about it. So I have to say that. That doesn't mean we don't have feelings about it. However, when it comes to fundamentally making the decision in and of itself, I do feel confident in my decision making. Does that make sense? So there's not that.
Oh, no, I'm following. Yeah, no,
there's
I get
not
it.
that residual guilt and blame and shame, and that is what's debilitating. Shame is debilitating, and we carry a lot of that.
Yeah, shame is probably one of the worst. I wouldn't want to wish it on my worst enemy, right? And it brings you down so fast. And getting out of that pit is hard. Like very like
Yeah. Yeah. And it's the difference between saying, I made a bad mistake and saying I am bad.
Yeah.
Or I am a mistake. There's a big difference between the two, right? Yeah. There's nothing you could do with that. If I am bad or I am a mistake, what do you do with that? That's just the way you see yourself, and that's how you can approach your life. If you said I made a poor decision, or right, okay, yeah, I'm human. Sometimes, I don't make the best decisions because I didn't think through it the way I needed to, but there's room to grow and there's always tomorrow, right? Like there's ways that you could kind of reconcile that. And maybe you need to make repair. Maybe you need to go over to your friend and say, you know what? Yeah, the way that I treated you wasn't exactly being my best self. And I really apologize. And I realize where I went wrong. And this is what I'm going to do in the future. Yes, that you could do something about, but not when you see yourself and identify yourself as like, again, these self-deprecating ways. Nothing you could do about that. Very helpless, hopeless. Yeah.
And I always say, like, to me, I'm a good person. I think so. I haven't done anything illegal or anything. And that's where I draw the line. There's my bar. And but I wouldn't talk to my best friend the way that I talk to myself. Like we are all worst, like maybe not everyone, but we are our own worst enemy. And it's easy to go down that path. What are your feelings on social media for mental health?
That's a big question. I'll try to answer it. I think there's so many different components. I think that, so I'm going to start with kind of the negative ones. Like, there's a lot of, I would say, counterproductive messages out there that definitely contribute negatively to our mental health. A good example, which just came up, which I'm going to write my next blog about, is on manifesting. This week, for some strange reason, I had a couple of incidences with both adults and teens. It was so interesting, which I haven't heard before, where I had this teenager. She's experiencing, well, she's a young adult, but she's experiencing such intense anxiety. It's so debilitating. It's getting to a point where it's debilitating. And she said to me, I can't think about that. I can't think about that because I'm going to manifest it. And I was like, what? And she was like, no, I can't, and I'm teaching her skills to lean into. And she's like, it's totally counterproductive. Right. And I said, what does that even mean? So she's like, I know it sounds superstitious, but like what you think about, you become, and what you think about happens and whatever. And I was like, who told you that? TikTok, right? And yes. And then I spoke to an adult who said something similar. I said, where did you get that from? And she was like, from TikTok. I was like, oh my goodness. Like all these messages out there that are so counterintuitive to the way our brain works. Like I'm definitely writing an article on this because I wrote an article some years ago. It's please stop preaching happiness, positive affirmation, and gratitude. And I wrote about how our culture, right, kind of preaches all of these things in our lives and social media and everything, and how counterproductive it is based on who we are and the way we're wired in terms of our neurocognition, in terms of our physiology, in terms of the way our amygdala works and our prefrontal cortex, etc. And people, they give me feedback and they're like, wow, I didn't think about that. But yeah, I mean, it's a sociocultural phenomenon that is so prohibitive. My goodness, people don't realize it. And it contributes to the negativity that we hold about ourselves as human beings and the way we interact with others and our relationships. So here's another thing that just came up, which I wasn't even aware of, but I was like, wow, that is so interesting. So I constantly find these phenomenons in our culture, and how we're acculturated that really affect the way that we view ourselves.
See, and I'm cynical. I think it's everyone just trying to hawk something, right? Buy my book. You're going to have spiritual everything. You're going to be like the golden child of heaven. I don't know. Right. So I know I'm probably a bad example, but I I do like the thought of getting up every morning and being like, hey, I'm alive today. It's all right. Do I believe I'm going to manifest a plane fall on my house? Well, it's Heather, maybe. Weirder things have happened around here. I have the gift. But like really honestly, no. Right? So putting your and why sorry, I'm all over the place. Why is there such a big surge in anxiety, and especially among young adults?
Yeah.
Now I have my I grew up, I'm a Gen X, right? No computers, no nothing, no proof. Which is a great thing, and I love like technology to a point, but I think it's also, again, not a doctor, I don't know, but constantly being able to search anything that you want any second of the day and get misinformation. Gone are the days going and looking it up in a encyclopedia where it's truth. And now you go down this route and you're getting misinformation everywhere.
Yeah.
So how, like, the anxiety in young kids, like, I can't believe even when my kids were smaller in elementary school, kids that wouldn't be able, oh, my kid can't go to school today, there's too much anxiety. What?
Mm-hmm.
And no offense, we're Canadian. Like, there's nothing really going on here in the school system. I'm just saying. So, like,
yes.
why are you scared to go to school?
Again, I think it's how we're taught. I don't think people have a general understanding about their brain, how their brain works and functions. I think that we don't learn effective coping skills. Listen, here's a good example. In schools, there's so much stress towards academics, but there's absolutely no stress towards social emotional learning. It's a travesty. I have to tell you, it's a travesty. So great, you have these kids who like are going to like school and whatever else, but like they can't function in the world. What is the point? I mean, I see kids who have to go back, who have to like leave college. I see kids who literally cannot function sometimes, because they do not have solid coping skills. So what's the point? Again, we have to really work on that, like as fundamentally, and again, we're getting political, but like as a country, it's not, we have a rise in anxiety because of so many different factors, and it's real. It's very real. Forget about, I could talk about things like socioeconomically and racism. And I mean, I could go on and on about like 1,000 things that affect also functioning, right. If you look at, I just did a class, for my class at NYU on the ACEs study, right, which is adverse childhood experiences, which affect our health, right? There's a correlation between childhood adverse experiences and our health. There's so many things that affect how we function, and we just don't pay attention to the important things. We just don't. We don't let our kids struggle. We're quick to, problem solve for them and ourselves. So again, if we had to talk about all the problems in the world, I could go on and on and on, but that's not going to be helpful or useful to anybody. So I think all we could focus on is ourselves. Like, what could we do? And just to piggyback what you said before we kind of end and wrap up, I think it's really, really important. We can't, like you said, we can't say, I'm wonderful, I'm smart, I'm intelligent, right? And I think you said, I love waking up in the morning and saying like, this is a positive day. I'm breathing, right? And having gratitude. But this is what it is. It's not because people talk about the essence of the gratitude of waking up and saying, this is a beautiful day, I could breathe. What are you going to do because you could breathe? That's the magic. I'm very happy that you're breathing. Okay. Very important. And you should have gratitude for breathing, because you know how many times that you breathe every day? Do you know how many times you breathe every day? No.
A million?
20,000 times. You breathe 20,000 times a day. So do I. Do you know that? And do you think about breathing even once during the day? No,
I'm just hoping I'm still doing it.
No, but my point is, what are you going to be doing because you could breathe? That's where the magic is.
So you have 20,000 times a day to do something good in the world.
That's right. To say, I am grateful that I am here on this planet. What could I be doing because I'm on this planet? And guess where your confidence is going to come from? I did something for this planet. And you're going to feel so good about it. You're going to have dopamine, and it's going to, again, right? All the serotonin and dopamine, that you're going to want to do it again and again and again and again. And then guess what? You're going to model it to your kids, and they're going to do it. So again, there's so much here that we could, that's what manifesting is. Like, if you want to talk about real manifesting, it's about doing. That's what it is. That's where it is. I can't will myself into wanting to do something just because I'm saying it. It doesn't work that way. And, I can't say that enough. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I really appreciate you, Matt. I could talk to you forever. I hope you come back, because I don't even think we scratched the surface.
I will happily come back.
Oh, thank you. Oh, well then, to be continued. Yes. Thank you again so much. And where can everyone find your book and all your, as we're ragging on social media, your social media?
So my book is called Ace Your Life, Unleash Your Best Self and Live the Life You Want. Here it is. I love my cover. Anyway, it's available at all bookstores. My audiobook's coming out in May, which I'm very excited about. But best place is on my website, which is my full name. It's www.michellemaidenberg.com. Michelle is 2 L's. Maidenberg is Maidenberg. Fairy Maidenberg, Berg. It has my blogs. You could also subscribe to Psychology Today, to my blogs. You could subscribe to my YouTube channel, get my guided meditations, and all the information about me, and everything I do is on my website.
And I highly recommend the meditations, because I have done them. I will be honest.
Thank you.
And in case you haven't met me, I'm a little high strung.
And you could, of course, follow me on Instagram, Facebook, all the social medias. I'm on all of them. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Thank you again so much.
Thank you, Heather.
That's all for this episode of 1% Better. To continue the conversation, head over to our website at www.1percentbetter.ca, where you can access more stories and resources. We'd also love it if you subscribed and left us a review on your favorite podcast platform. And remember, friends, progress takes patience, perspective, and sometimes a little help from people who get it. So be kind to yourself and others as we work to get 1% better every day. We'll see you back here next week.